Welcome to part 3 of the context and background for the performance Sympathy for Exú. Red is the color of my true love's lying, cheating lipstick. Vermelho é a cor da Iansã, guerreira poderosa da tempestade, amante da justiça. In his collection of West African myth narratives, Alex Kuoko tells of the origin and meaning of the name of the Orisha Iansã, also called Oya. Iansã was married to Ogun, who is the Orisha of metals, highways, and war, before she was seduced by Shango, the Orisha of thunder, lightning, and justice. When Ogun found out about the affair between Shango and Iansã, he became furious. He consulted Olodumare, a manifestation of the supreme deity, for advice. He was told that he should not be angry, but rather he should forgive both Shango and Iansã. Refusing this advice, he went in pursuit. And this is a passage from Alex Kuoko's book. Later on, when he finally found them, he had a major fight with Oya. He launched blows at her with his magical iron stick and cut her in 9 parts. The number 9 connected with Oya is also in the origin of the name Iansã, which comes from different regions of the old Dahomey, where the cult of Oya is practiced, and it is a reference to the 9 deltas of the river Niger. So, honoring the myth of Iansã and her refracted nature, I will take the time to broadly define the term refraction in its previous linguistic uses. I will first outline the most basic definitions for refraction in the world of physics. The phenomenon of refraction occurs when a light wave, or a sound wave or energy wave, passes through a transparent medium at an oblique angle. The angle of refraction and the degree to which it distorts depends on the difference in molecules between the two different substances through which it passes. The most common example of refraction is the image of a pencil in a glass of water. We see the pencil enter the water, and it is straight. Once the pencil is in the glass of water, our eyes perceive it as bent or even broken. Refraction can also cause optic phenomena such as rainbows when light passes through air with moisture, and mirages when light passes through differing temperatures. In photography, lenses are crafted to offer different focal lengths to the photographer. Whether converging or diverging, the light passes through the lenses and becomes refracted before it reaches the other side. In some cases, a lens might be utilized specifically to give the effect that only parts of the image in front of the camera are in focus. Refraction is also a term used in ophthalmology. When our eyes are misshapen, they require a refraction analysis to determine if we are farsighted, nearsighted, or have astigmatism. An optometrist then crafts a new lens to correct the vision. My hope is that this theoretical lens will be a lens that actually does something, that it can be used to correct one's vision when moments of doubt or uncertainty arise. These moments of doubt or uncertainty or discomfort can be signals that something about the way we are currently perceiving the situation or phenomenon is flawed, faulty, or distorted. It is an opportunity to reconsider and possibly correct our perceptions. One of my tactics for unpacking our understandings of key terms is a technique I learned with João Fiadeiro and Fernanda Eugenio from an organization called AndLab. Fiadeiro and Eugenio start by literally cutting up words on a piece of paper to reassemble them in order to highlight their constructed nature and separate them into components for further consideration of the word parts. In her essay, Ethnography as Spiritual Practice, Amira de la Garza hints at a similar strategy with Marie Daly's Webster work, where the etymology of a word is unpacked through a breaking up of the word into parts in order to understand its components. In the case of the breakout session with AndLab, they discussed how the word reparar in Portuguese became the key for understanding this as a technique. Reparar in Portuguese means variably to repair, to take notice, to restore, to make over again, to improve, to remedy, to correct, etc. For Fiadeiro and Eugenio, they broke up the word to be reparar, to stop again. In this sense, they posited that only by taking the time to stop and stop again, to look, might we truly take notice and make the efforts to repair or correct something that might be a problem. This links directly to the etymology of refract, which means to break up or re-break. In response to their presentation, I offered a further extension to this. First, I pointed out that in English, the word repair can also be broken up into re-pair, indicating that two things that have been separated must be joined together again in order to make them right again. The etymology of refract implies an interesting and perhaps even troubling concept that this process of refraction involves not only an initial breaking, but a further or perhaps even repeated breaking up. I argue that a repeated breaking up of our perception about a troubling phenomenon is exactly the experience that results in the affective sensation of deep doubt, uncertainty, or discomfort that provides the impetus for recognizing that something about the way we view the world might be problematic. I argue that the word recognize, or reconhecer in Portuguese, becomes recognize, or reconhecer, to meet again. This results in an understanding of the verb recognize, as being a process of cognitively reprocessing, to recognize. Following the same logic, the verb refract, implies the notion that the world comes to us broken up and fractured. Part of our sense-making process involves the ordering of life's data into a coherent whole. The process of refraction is breaking up what appears to be whole, then a refracturing of our perception. When a rupture occurs in our understanding or experience, we need to refract. One important consideration about using the idea of refraction as a metaphor for analysis or as a hermeneutic tool is the tendency for metaphors to hide some aspects of a phenomenon while highlighting others. In the case of refraction, an incomplete use of the metaphor would rely only on vision and sight as a way of thinking through problems. Proper use of the metaphor of refraction requires the continued awareness that it is being used to highlight aspects of actual phenomenon and not to characterize them. Therefore, aspects of the phenomenon, such as feelings of doubt, which may not correspond to a visual sense, can be better understood using the metaphor. Sensing a phenomenon through other means must be taken into consideration when using refraction as a tool for analysis. For this reason, I argue that the concept must include an awareness of how feelings of doubt uncertainty, or discomfort relate to the shift in perspective. Iansã's fractured nature is only one arbitrary way to include her as a guiding archetype in the study. She also becomes particularly relevant in the study because she is considered to be a warrior orisha. Fiery and tempestuous, she is associated with storms and is a lover of justice. She is additionally considered to be a protector of children. On more than one occasion, my study participants commented on how women in Itacaré are guerreiras, female warriors. I've also been told by more than one Mãe de Santo that she is most likely the Orisha who would be the Dona da minha cabeça should I ever be initiated into the Candomblé religion. She is syncretized with the Catholic Saint Barbara. Iansã becomes important to this study for several reasons. One retired nurse, after a pointed discussion about the failings of public health and public education in Itacaré and in Bahia and in various parts of Brazil, commented that mulher de Itacaré é guerreira. But when considering how this relates to the existence of a palpable social activism in the region, she followed up by saying that there are far too many women in the region who are illiterate. She indicated that this kind of ignorance makes it difficult to have an organized movement for social change. Lídia, a hostel owner, agreed that women in Itacaré are guerreiras and went further to say that women are the hardest working people in Itacaré. She specifically excluded men from this statement. When I asked her to explain why she viewed baianas and baianos so differently, she hesitated before responding. Elas têm menos preguiça, vão falar a palavra certa. Perhaps her own background has colored her perspective. She was born and raised in São Paulo. In São Paulo, she worked as a police officer. She moved to France as a young adult, married a Frenchman, and spent 20 years in France. She and her husband moved from France to Bahia several years ago, looking for a better life than they had in France. She identifies this as a kind of Brazilian dream: move to Europe, make a lot of money, then return to Brazil for retirement. She has lived in Itacaré as a small business owner for the last 5 years. In her interview with me, she described many of the difficulties she had in those 5 years that she lived and worked in Itacaré. She expressed a kind of difficulty in comprehending how things work in Bahia. When she described the stereotype of the Baiano man lying around in a hammock, she did so with an expression that might be considered to be a mixture of disdain and envy. In the same interview, she indicated that after 5 years of difficulties, she finally learned that life isn't meant to be as complicated as we tend to make it. On another occasion, I overheard a U.S. American comment, "They think they have enough." I understood this comment to mean a moment where he was questioning the logic of being content with the current situation, not wanting to progress or grow or have more in life. But it only takes a brief look at Santos's theory of the logic of the monoculture of time as well as the logic of productivity to uncover the problem with the logic behind that statement. The statement holds as a basic assumption that progress is always already desirable and that working to be increasingly productive is always already a virtue. I observed one conversation between a U.S. American and a Brazilian about working 20 years at a bank. The Brazilian woman couldn't understand why the job wouldn't pay very well. How could they possibly trust a bank manager not to steal if they weren't paid well? She posed a difficult question to answer. Who are the fools? The ones who work 20 years for low pay at the same job? Or someone who works freely and on her own schedule to sell trinkets on the beach in a beautiful setting? The conflicting perspectives are indicative of two different ways of looking at the same situation. In Lídia's description of her 5 years in Itacaré, she claims é uma ilusão muito grande morar num lugar turístico. The 5 years she spent in Itacaré resulted in a profound disruption of this illusion of a better life in this idyllic setting. This process of disrupting her illusion and recreating a new perspective for herself can be viewed as a means of allowing a process of refraction to take place that can shift her perspective. She was encantada by the visions of gringos bringing lots of money to spend. She entered into a business deal to manage a posada. She admitted that she wasn't fool enough to think that she might make a lot of money, but she did become enamored of the idea of having a better quality of life. She talked about how difficult it was for her and for others from the south of Brazil, like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, who become accustomed to lifestyle in Bahia. She describes baianos. Eles são bem tranquilos, não esquentam com nada. Eles têm o pão deles. Eles não têm muita motivação para avançar. For her, this has created difficulties. She has had to become accustomed to the difficulties associated when you need to hire someone locally, be they an employee or an electrician or a plumber. She describes baianos as living very much moment to moment. É hoje, é agora, é aqui. Amanhã a gente vê. After 5 years of seeing the way baianos react to their environment, she finally realized, eles têm razão. Para quê? Para que se estressar, né? A vida é muito simples, no final de contas, né? É como um ditado que eu ouvi uma vez. Isso fala do amor, mas para mim é a vida. É uma frase que dizia assim, olha, o amor, ele depende de tanta simplicidade que só os ignorantes fazem com perfeição. She qualified this statement, indicating that the so-called ignorance in that statement has nothing to do with wisdom or intelligence. She described it as an ignorance of cultural knowledge. But for those living in the Roça with no knowledge of technology or even how to read or write, they are happy. When she used the word ignorant, she gestured that she put it in scare quotes to indicate that those living a life in the Roça have a deep wisdom about things that we will never be able to reach. In contrast, she looks at her own life and says, the rest of us are bogged down by our worries about whether or not we can pay for a car or pay the house payment. She sees them as being happy and herself as not happy. The last day that I saw Lydia in Itacaré, she told me how she had lost her hostel business and was having to leave Itacaré to move back to São Paulo to try to make a living there. Stay tuned for part 4. Hope you're doing well.